What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. So, today, what I'm going to do is just kind of talk a little bit about who I am and kind of what I'm into. And so, pretty much, what this is going to be is just a show talking about rock, metal, some punk. And when I say punk, I'm more into the old school punk stuff like Misfits, The Exploited, Adolescents, Agent Orange, of course, Ramones, a lot of stuff like that. That's more of the stuff that I'm into. A lot of the new punk, um, there is some new punk that I like. I really like the more raw sounding punk. I really don't like the really over polished pop punk. Like, I really don't like that. To me, punk is supposed to be just dirty, raw, and gritty. And a lot of newer punk bands are just really overproduced and really slick sounding. And to me, that doesn't really fit well with punk. Um, but when it's done right and it's done like old school punk, where it's just raw and really dirty sounding, old school style punk, I love that kind of stuff. Um, and I'm really into all kinds of rock and metal, everything from what we're going to talk about today, Kiss, to Motley Crue, to Ted Nugent, to Cannibal Corpse, to Venom, Bathory, Carcass, New York Dolls, Skid Row, Cheap Trick. Obviously, a lot of different stuff there. Murder Dolls, Wednesday 13, Faster Pussycat, a lot of different stuff there. And I really don't get into a lot of discussion about, okay, this band is death metal, this band is, you know, uh, blackened deathcore, grindcore, whatever. I just, to me, I'm not big into talking about, what bands are called genre wise. To me, that's just really somebody's opinion and very, very subjective. So I really don't get into that as much. Trying to weigh down what genre a band is. I could care less if I think it sounds awesome and I'm into it, then that's all I need. I don't care about what it's labeled as. So, and I am a musician. I play different instruments. I play guitar, bass, drums. I've been in quite a few different bands, recorded some albums and stuff. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much that. What got me into music as a very, very young kid was Kiss, and this, oh gosh, had to be early '90s. I was probably around 5 years old, maybe younger, maybe a little bit older. I can't remember. I just remember I was very, very young, and going to, I believe it was like a Walmart with a family member at the time, and I was looking, through cassettes because this is once again around the early '90s. So there was definitely CDs, of course, at that time, but cassettes was definitely the real popular music format at the time. And just looking through cassettes, and I just happened to pick up one that said Kiss and looked at the album cover, and I was like, I have to have this. This is what I want. Of course, never heard of Kiss, didn't know what they were, never seen them before. But the album was Kiss Rock and Roll Over, and still to this day, one of my favorite albums of all time, period. And my family member at the time was like, "Hey, you're not going to want that. You're not going to be interested in that." Kind of trying to talk me out of it, and understandably so. I mean, my family member that was with me at the time, he is a big rock fan, hard rock fan, especially '70s stuff, and he was a Kiss fan. Um, I didn't know that at the time. I just saw the album cover and thought it was amazing and had to have it. But again, when you're just a little kid, what little kid is really gonna, care about, a hard rock cassette album? You know, most kids just don't give a shit, right? But something about it, I had to have it. So convinced them to get it for me. And back then, everybody had boom boxes. It was kind of a boom box. It just had like one speaker, instead of two, and had a cassette player and like an FM radio. And I remember just opening up the cassette, putting it in the tape player, had no idea, what this was going to be or sound like. No idea. And yeah, so after that, that changed my life forever. And that's what got me into music. And so yeah, so today we'll talk a little bit about Kiss here because that is probably definitely my favorite band. It's what got me into music. It's what got me into playing music. Inspired me to write music and pick up a guitar and play drums and all this other stuff. So, um, my favorite Kiss albums, it's a tie between Rock and Roll Over and Creatures of the Night. I really can't pick between those two. I love those albums. Still to this day, uh, frequently in my CD player or on my turntable. And, you know, uh, Ace Frehley's 78 solo album, when they each four did a solo album, Ace's solo album is up there with one of my favorites as well. I love that album. Everything on it is just kick ass. So yeah, the first time I ever saw, because you got to remember back in the early to mid 90s, there was no YouTube. Um, the internet wasn't, really around at that point until a little bit later. So you couldn't just get on YouTube and type in, Kiss, and there's like years and years and years of live concert footage and music videos and everything else you could possibly imagine that's out there. So the first time I ever saw Kiss on TV moving, you know, was Beavis and Butthead. It's kind of strange, but that's the first time I saw Kiss on a TV was Beavis and Butthead, and they were watching, they would watch music videos in between, their episodes, and it was Kiss, I Love It Loud, and yeah, that was just the greatest thing ever, and because at that point, MTV was still showing music videos, but they weren't showing a lot of Kiss, you know. The only time, that I would really, see Kiss was, either there or, Headbangers Ball whenever I would actually, catch it. Because being Headbangers Ball was still on at this point. Uh, but I was just such a young kid that, I didn't, grasp the concept of, okay, this TV show comes on this certain day at this certain time every week. So I'd catch it, very sparingly, just here and there. And the One of the biggest things to me as a kid, I remember was this is back when MTV was still doing the Unplugged TV show, where they would have bands come out and just do acoustic, sets. And I remember seeing the commercial for Kiss Unplugged and just being so stoked that, here's my favorite band. They're going to be doing, an acoustic show on TV. This is amazing. And I remember being on a school night and I couldn't stay up and watch it. So my parents recorded it for me that night. And I remember just not being able to sleep. It was like legitimately like Christmas, Christmas Eve. You can't sleep because you're just imagining what your presents are going to be the next day, right? You cannot sleep because you're sitting there thinking of, what's under that tree the next morning. And that's the way it was for me that night, just trying to imagine, because at this point I already had, all of, Kiss's discography on cassette. So I knew their songs and I just couldn't imagine what songs they were going to do, what they were going to look like, just everything about it. And, then the next day at school, just all day through school, just trying to imagine, what they did and what it sounded like. And I remember getting off the school bus that day and just running home, literally running home, so I could put that VHS tape in the VCR. And yeah, it was a very historic moment for me, as a very young kid. And man, it was just it, especially when Paul announced, we got some members of the family here tonight, and out comes Ace Frehley and Peter Criss. Man, that was just mind blowing. And still to this day, man, I can watch that Kiss MTV Unplugged anytime. I mean, the whole thing was great. Bruce Kulick was awesome. Eric Singer was awesome. Having Ace and Peter there and then having all of them all together join, for the last two songs were just killer. And it still is awesome to this day. Um, so yeah, and then of course, the reunion happens and, you know, Kiss is the biggest band in the world again at that point, which was just great, as a kid because I caught Kiss. Of course, when I got into them, the first album, Rock and Roll Over, I had no idea that, this band was still around, that they didn't have makeup anymore at that point, because that was all I knew. And then went back and started getting more and more of their albums on cassette and then looking at the album covers and the inside pictures and being like, you know, is this what Ace looks like without his makeup? And then realizing later that it was Bruce Kulick, and yeah, it was just such a crazy time because once again, you couldn't just get, online and type in, Kiss and go look at their Wikipedia or something and, just see the whole lineup changes and all this stuff. Um, which another thing was really cool was Kiss Alive 3. I remember getting that on cassette tape and just opening it up. And on the inside of that, there's like a kind of like a family tree, except this is, Kiss's family tree of every member that was ever in the band up until that point and where they came from before that. So that was really interesting. And it probably helped to get so much into Kiss as a kid because, like I said, there was so much out there as far as their albums. They had a huge catalog at that point that, you could go to, the store and just, look through the cassette tapes and like, oh gosh, I haven't seen this one before. I have to have it. And there was always something else out there. And so yeah, whenever the reunion happened, and I remember I used to get the rock and the Metal Edge magazines and Hit Parader as well. But I was really big into the Metal Edge magazines, and I remember before the reunion happened, I was getting the Metal Edge magazines and like getting the posters with Paul Jean and at that time Bruce Kulick and Eric Singer, and it was just so cool. And then after the reunion happened, it's like all of a sudden here's, Peter and Ace back, and you got the makeup back, and just a big thing. And at that point, Kiss was, the biggest band in the world again, and they were everywhere. And that was just such a cool time. And from there, I got into more and more bands. Um, the next band I really, got into, which after I got into Kiss, I remember the same family member, he had a cassette of Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil. And again, had no idea who Motley Crue was, never heard of them. I was still very young. But I remember looking at the album cover and again just being like, man, this looks really killer. Like this just looks so cool. And then listening to the music, and it just sounded so heavy and had such an attitude to it. And still to this day, Motley Crue Shout the Devil is one of my favorite albums of all time. And I still say that even though Kiss is, my favorite band, um, Shout the Devil is probably my all-time favorite album. I love the way that album sounds. Everything, the production, the way the drums sound, the guitar tone. My God, Vince's vocals on that album just never sounded as good as they did on Shout the Devil. That album's a masterpiece, in my opinion. So yeah, and then of course, classic rock was really big here. So listen to the classic rock stations. Getting into Aerosmith, AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, Ozzy, Sabbath. So my love for music just grew and grew and grew from there. And, I definitely have to credit, especially Ace Frehley, for, me picking up a guitar and wanting to learn how to play. Um, yeah, just watching Ace and just seeing like he just had this charisma and just this cool factor about him. And so that I really have to say, Ace Frehley definitely was, a huge inspiration for me. And also Peter Criss and his drumming. I mean, I remember getting uh, just like coffee cans and bowls and stuff, and just hitting them like I'm playing drums. And years later, actually finally got some drums and learned how to play. And Peter, in my opinion, doesn't get the credit he deserves as a drummer. Um, especially from like the first album to before Dynasty. I mean, he was an amazing drummer. He really was. And to me, it's not all about how technical you are. To me, it's about how that person plays and the choices that that person makes. With their instrument, whether it's drums or guitar. A lot of people bag on Ace and say he's a sloppy guitar player, this and that, you know, but to me, it adds so much character. And I would much rather listen to that than somebody that can play, just a million miles an hour. I mean, it's interesting to see somebody do that, to see how fast they can play, and it's so technical and all this stuff. It's like, okay, that's cool. But there's no feeling there, there's no character there, there's nothing behind it. It's very machine like. So, but that's just my opinion on it. Um, so as far as today's Kiss, um, like I know there's a lot of fans that uh, don't like Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer being in the band, and then there's a section of fans that love Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer and don't want to see Ace and Peter back in the band. And I have nothing against Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer. I think they're great players. I mean, they are great players, or they wouldn't be there. Um, my only thing is, and I know it won't change. You know, obviously it's too far along now that there's no reason for them to. But I just wish that they would have given Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer their own identities, their own personas, um, their own makeup. You know, instead of wearing, Peter Chris's and Ace Frehley's makeup, I'd have much rather, have them have their own identities. And I don't really have the time here to get into the reasons that I think that they didn't go that route, that, Paul and Gene didn't go that route. And obviously, I don't know anything more than anybody else. This is just me, you know, throwing shit out there and just my opinion and, my assumptions is all it is. Um, but I think, one of the reasons I believe is that there's a lot of fans that go to Kiss concerts that aren't. I mean, there's a lot of fans there that aren't hardcore Kiss fans like me and a lot of other people that know every song, that know every member that's ever been in the band, know their whole history and all this stuff, right? I would say probably the majority of the people at the shows aren't. I would say a lot of the people there at just the regular shows, the concerts, are just people that, oh, hey, Kiss is in town. Okay, yeah, they're a kick ass rock and roll band. They have this huge show. They wear, face paint and, rock and roll all night. They probably know Lick It Up and Detroit Rock City, stuff like that. Oh, Gene Simmons, he spits blood, breathes fire, right? Um, so I'm sure there's a lot of people out in the crowd that have no idea that that's not really Ace Frehley and that's not really Peter Criss. And, you know, of course, Gene and Paul know that. So why confuse fans that are just casual, fans that just go up to the show and if they see two new, because I mean, the Catman and the Spaceman are iconic, that that's just iconic characters. When they see that makeup, they know they've seen it before. If they saw two new, you characters up there, two new face paint, like it would be really confusing, and some a lot of casual fans would maybe look down on it, and be like, this isn't really them, blah blah blah. So I think that that has something to do with it. Man, I could be totally wrong. Who knows? That's just my opinion, my way of thinking on it. I could see them going that route because of that. For one reason, I'm sure there's many other reasons as well. Like I said, we don't really have time for right now to get into. Um, so yeah, but and as far as the reunion, uh, I don't think it'll ever happen. I would love to see Ace Frehley and Peter Criss back in the band. I would love to see that. I would, I mean, just to see, like a small tour of it, with Ace and Peter back in the band. And then, of course, in a perfect world, a whole new album with the original four guys, and that's it. Not like a Psycho Circus, which we can probably get into that album another time as well. But with the original four guys, all four guys only actually playing on it, man, that would be killer. That would be awesome. But I don't, I really don't see that ever happening. I think at the very most of what we might see, and again, I don't know anything. I've not heard anything. I don't, this is just me making assumptions and guessing here, throwing shit at the wall. But I think at the most, we might see Ace getting up on stage and doing a couple songs here and there. Not even for a whole, tour or anything. Just, maybe shows here or there, two or three songs at the most, and that'd be it. I don't see Peter, you know, doing anything with Kiss, to be honest. as far as getting up on stage and doing anything. I mean, at the very most, maybe eventually they'll have him come up and sing Beth or something, maybe. Um, but yeah, because from what is out there, apparently Peter's health wouldn't really. I mean, he is, the oldest member of the band, so and he's the one that be, beating the shit out of drums. I mean, that's not exactly easy for anyone at that age. And we all know he's had it was a wrist or hand problems, whatever it was. So obviously a lot of complications there, and I just don't see that happening with Peter being able to. I mean, I don't think he would be able to do a whole tour, playing drums, especially at that big of a show, which is really unfortunate. I mean, I would love to see it. I would love to see Ace and Peter back in the band, at least for a tour and then an album. But I know that will probably, most likely, never happen. But I would love to see it. Um, so yeah, I just want to thank everybody for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. I will do another one hopefully next week. And normally, what we'll do is just, you know, have a little bit of rock and metal news, talk about whatever album I might be digging and getting into right now, or some bands that I've heard that I'm getting into, or, going back and listening to again, just whatever's around at the time. But I want to thank everybody so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.